Hello, friends. Welcome to Feeling This Life. We're a family support podcast that dives deep into the triumphs, challenges, and strategies that are part of the lives of those who care for children with blindness and visual impairments. I'm Paige Maynard, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired and an early interventionist at VIPS, Visually Impaired Preschool Services.
And I'm Dr. Cathy Smith, and I also have been a teacher of students with visual impairment for many years, and now I am the Director of Research at Anchor Center for Blind Children.
I am jcastenir, and I am the Family Services Coordinator at VIPS. I am the mother of 3 girls, and my youngest has a visual impairment.
Hi everyone! In the spirit of some of the themes of today's episode, we thought that instead of editing out background noise, we'd keep it in, so that you can practice using your auditory skills to identify some of the sounds. We'll share at the end of the episode what each of the sounds are. Enjoy!
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Smith, and we're here on Feeling This Life to talk to you in our second season. We have something a little different today. We thought we would try sharing with you a book that we've all read. So we're going to do a book talk. We'll see how this goes. And the book is For the Benefit of Those Who See by Rosemary Mahoney. And here's a little summary just so you know more about what the book is about. So after having a traumatic experience in college with an eye injury, reporter and teacher Rosemary Mahoney is convinced that becoming blind is the worst thing that could happen to her, or anyone else for that matter. Years later, after traveling to Tibet on an assignment where she meets Sabria, the blind woman who started Braille Without Borders, and the children who live there, her interactions with the students not only teach her that they are all engaging, unique individuals, but that in many cases they have skills that she is missing as a sighted person. After this experience, Rosemary begins to explore more about the cultural history of blindness through reading texts written by adult blind individuals. Time spent at Braille Without Borders and the Small Business International Training Center for Blind Adults in India confirms her understanding that being blind is not the worst thing that can happen to anyone, and actually comes with skills and gifts that she admires. Paige?
We also wanted to give a disclaimer that some of the terminology that is used in the book may not be words that we would use as we refer to people who are blind or visually impaired. But one thing that we also have talked about separate from recording this episode is that it's so important to ask the person who has a visual impairment that you are talking with or interacting with how they want to be referred to and how or what type of language that they want to use around their visual impairment. So we wanted to give that as a disclaimer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we need to, so a book club is a little bit different. We're not interviewing anybody. We're not just talking about a subject, but the idea was to kind of get us thinking about different things we wouldn't ordinarily think of. So Jenny, what was your reaction to the book?
So, coming from the side of a parent and not a professional, this book really validated stuff that I worry about on a daily basis. So, my daughter, while she's visually impaired and legally blind, she has very good, she has functional vision somewhat, but she's very good at getting around. She doesn't look blind, if that makes sense to the outside world. So there's times that, and part of this I'll admit is me, I just need to get over the worry and not care what other people are thinking. But part of me is like, does this teacher really understand? Or does this coach think that I'm this crazy parent who is saying all this stuff about my kid. But like, this book talks about how well people with visual impairments get around. She talks about how well they do things. A lot of times they do things better than her. She even goes out to point out that those of us that have sight don't realize that we're overpowered by our sight, and that is a handicap. And I love that because, for example, my daughter, when we go to church on Wednesday nights, she's in this huge room. And if I have my keys with me, if I walk up to the door with the keys in my hand, she hears the keys and comes straight to me. And that sounds crazy to everyone, that she knows the sound of my keys versus everybody else's keys. But she does. If I don't have my keys in my hand, I can stand at the door and watch her for however long until I speak. And it's just things like that, and the ways that, and I don't even know how she's adapted. This book talks about smelling people, like not like a stinky person, but like the way that each individual person smells. Talks about the sound of footsteps. And I think as a parent, if you think about that, if you're downstairs and your kids are running around upstairs, a lot of times you can tell which one's which, like even if you've never thought of it before, if you think about it now. And so just all those things that I think she uses on a daily basis, and this just kind of validated all my fears of like how to explain why she doesn't look blind to the outside world.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really, so I think my experience of working with parents right away is it's often difficult to explain that your child will learn to use their other senses and that will encourage that. And I think this book really puts that right out in the open. It gives you very good, like I think what you were saying about the smelling is that one of the girls recognized her in the hallway by the smell of her shampoo. So who would have thought, you know? But when you can't see, you are not overwhelmed with the visual information. Do you find the same thing, Paige, with your family?
Yeah, I like one of the quotes in the book that I think really talks about that. I want to read it because it really spoke to me. And it is from, let me see what part. It's from the chapter called The Neglected Senses. And so she says, sight is a slick and overbearing autocrat, trumpeting its prodigal knowledge and perceptions so forcefully that it drowns out the other subtler senses. We go through our day semi-oblivious to a whole range of sensory information because we are distracted and enslaved by our eyes. And I think that when I read that, it felt like it spoke so much to me because as a teacher, one of the things that I think that I maybe have done in the past is talk to families and talk to myself and maybe my students about how, oh, well, you can't see this, so I'm going to tell you about it, or you can't see this, so, blah, blah, blah. But then helping it, I guess maybe it kind of helped me as somebody who is working with kids and working with their families to maybe think a little bit more about like opening up the world to like all of the sensory cues are equally important. Vision isn't the one that is like the king over all of them or anything like that. Like we need to give all the sensory cues and all the sensory information, equal education or whatever you want to say, that we're providing instruction in those and allowing for those to be just as important. And even for ourselves as sighted people, like now like that I read this and then I read another book by Daniel Kish about echolocation and FlashSonar recently, how now I'll go into a room and I'm like, oh, I can hear this room, or like right now I'm recording in my closet. When I come into my closet, I can hear that it's my closet, whereas like before I wouldn't have done that. Or like I was in the woods hiking the other day and there's this really big tree and I could like hear the echo off the tree, and it's like so weird that I never would have thought of that before. But like reading this and learning some of that information, I think has been really interesting thinking about that.
I really like that. I actually want to read that book too, Paige. But my daughter does this. She can hear the school that she goes to. And I've really encouraged teachers to come up to her and say, "Hi, it's Miss, so-and-so. Hi, it's Mr. So-and-so." And I know that's not natural. So it's really hard for people to remember, especially when she uses her senses to pick out, she knows where she is in the school. So if someone's like, "Hey," she's like, "Oh, well, I'm by Miss So-and-so's room, so that's her." And like she kind of knows the layout and she hears the school, and she'll know, like, if she's in the gym, she can kind of deduct who's probably talking to her. So yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I
this
also like to, sorry, go ahead.
no. Well, I was just going to say, I just heard another podcast the other day that I was listening to, and it was about the sense of smell and some of the research that they've done about the sense of smell. And I think we really overlook that. We don't think about that, and this book brought that up again to me. So I think that's a great idea, maybe for a future podcast that we do, talking about that sense of smell. But yeah, vision is so fast. You know what? We get so much information visually immediately when we have vision. So it is overpowering sometimes, but it's not necessarily best. So now what were you going to say, Paige?
Speaking of smell, it reminded me of one of my favorite parts of the book where Rosemary she blindfolds herself, and then two of the students from the school take her from the school to the temple, I believe.
Yes.
And she is just like scared to death of, well, how are we going to get there, and how are we going to know, and how am I going to be safe, and all of these things. And then the students are like, "Oh, well, whenever we hear these TVs, this is a TV story that we know, and then we turn this way. And whenever the pavement changes under our feet, then we know that we're in this place." And then they have one thing where they said, "Oh, whenever we smell the tires, we know we're at such and such place, and now we need to turn this way." The same way that whenever, you're walking somewhere on a walk, or you're driving in your car, "Oh, well, whenever I see McDonald's, I turn left. Whenever I see this stoplight, I turn this way, or I go through it." And so really it's just a different sensory cue that we don't pay attention to.
Yeah. And the beer too. Do you remember the beer part? So when they got to the temple, people leave beer for the Buddha at the temple, so they could tell that. And also then later she had a beer in the classroom and she wasn't supposed to. And the students came in and said, "You have beer." And she's like, "How can you tell that I have beer from across the room?" So I thought that was great too. So yeah, smell is powerful. Does your daughter use smell frequently in the house or at school?
I don't know, like I can't think of an example of how she actually uses her smell, but I will say her smell is much more sensitive. I should ask her, because I know that she has to. I just know that she does, the way that I've explained how she uses her hearing. But she's much more sensitive to smell. Like she does not like one of our cars because she says that car smells.
Oh, interesting.
And she always wants to take the other car.
Huh.
And nobody else smells anything in that car. And I don't know what the deal is, but that's always her stance. "I don't want to go in that car. It smells."
Interesting.
So I have no idea why.
Wow. And yeah, so that's good for her, that she uses all of her senses. So what other parts of the book were interesting to you guys?
So I underlined this part of the book, and I really like this. It says, "Blindness, more than any other physical handicap, has been terrifying even in the most intelligent and enlightened people since the beginning of time." And then it goes on and it says that it's like affected social status. It's affected what they've been able to do, how people look at them. And I just thought it was so interesting that she says more than any other physical handicap.
Absolutely. I think the research shows very clearly that if you ask people what sense they would not be willing, so what's their least likely sense to lose, pretty much everybody would say vision. And smell, and interestingly enough, smell would be, people are like, well, I don't care if I lose my sense of smell. So, and yet it's something that can be very powerful. So I'm really glad that you brought that quote up, because I've always been really interested in kind of the sociological effects of vision loss, and I think that it is something that many people are afraid of on a kind of a gut level, losing their sight. And I feel particularly very privileged that because I have known so many kids and adults that are blind, that I don't fear that. I understand that you can have a happy, productive life even if you don't, but that's because I interact with people like that every day. And I think a lot of the concern, a lot of the reason for that is people don't have access to people who are blind or have vision loss, because they think, oh, this must be the most horrible, just like Rosemary in the beginning, this is the most horrible thing that could happen to me. And then after she experiences and gets to know people, that like, oh, well, maybe this isn't so bad, this could actually be kind of cool. So
I agree with that, and I would encourage anybody who has a visually impaired child or friend or family member, or just anyone that's interested in vision, and especially anyone that just fears. We all have fears.
yeah.
And that can just be a fear for who knows why they fear maybe going blind one day. But if that's something that you think about, I would encourage you to try to find someone, or even you can reach out to us and just kind of experience, like Rosemary did, spending time with the visually impaired and seeing what they go through and how their life is. I think experiencing things in research can be really empowering. This was interesting to me because our daughter that has a visual impairment, she's adopted, and it typically takes at least 2 years at a minimum for the adoption process from the country that she's from. And we got her a year to the day from the day we submitted all of our information. And I really believe that that was because she was visually impaired. There's a whole group of people just advocating for visually impaired children to be adopted, just because it's something that people are not okay with. They're afraid of it, and they just don't know what to do with that child or what their life would look like.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paige, do you have, when you meet with a family, are you able through VIPS to connect families with other families so that they can know about how some children might be successful?
Yes. We always talk about how there's so much connection that's available, like on social media. Like within VIPS, we have a Facebook group. Jenny is our family services coordinator, and so any VIPS family, please reach out to Jenny.
Yeah.
But then also, oftentimes I'll have a family who maybe they're going through like one specific thing, and I know there's another family going through whatever that thing is. And, of course, everybody has a visual impairment, but there may be some specifics like age or gender or, where they live or something like that. And so a lot of times I'll ask them, oh, is it okay if I connect you to so-and-so? And, so sometimes they'll get to be friends, or they'll spend some time together, have a play date and things like that. And I think it really helps to be able to spend time with someone else who has had a similar experience as you, or maybe if there's a family member listening who maybe isn't a parent, maybe you're a grandparent or maybe an aunt or a friend or somebody like that, that just being exposed and spending time with someone who has a visual impairment might be really helpful. Because I think that in many areas of life where you go through something that you didn't expect would happen, or situations that you didn't expect, learning to embrace what is happening and learning to find joy in that, I think is really important and can really be empowering. And so it reminds me of another quote that was one of my favorites in the book. So I want to read that if you guys don't mind. And it's just a short one, and it's in the chapter that's called Braille Without Borders. But Rosemary is quoting Sabria as she talks about her own journey toward accepting her visual impairment. And she says, "Not until I accepted my blindness, Sabria told me with visible emotion, did I begin to live." And so as we really work on accepting and embracing a life maybe that isn't what we expected, I feel like it's so important to start to do that and to, work through your feelings about it, because once you are through some of those really hard emotions, of course they may come back up again as there may be individual things, that you're dealing with, but that really learning to embrace life as a person with a visual impairment or a family member of someone who has a visual impairment, I think is really, really important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so at Anchor Center we have we have an infant toddler program, and so parents bring their children in and they get to meet each other, and so the infant parents get to see the toddler parents and the preschoolers. And so I think that really helps them just feel a little bit better that, that their child can do well in the future. I also know I just was able to go to the American Foundation for the Blind Leadership Conference, and that was really fun for me because there's a lot of blind adults who attend that conference, and to just hear them presenting and seeing them and the successful ways they're changing technology and accessibility today was a really exciting kind of experience for me. I know, so in the notes for this, I can put there's a couple of, what do they call them now, influencers on
I was just about to say that we can't forget YouTube and TikTok and all those people,
right,
so
on
important.
social media. So I can put I know of at least 2 young ladies who are just, I follow them daily just because it's fun to see them be so successful, and they're talking about fashion and advocacy and all those things that regular young people should be talking about. So I think that is a fun way to kind of, so think about when I was a teenager, we had magazines, right? You went and got Teen Beat or whatever so that you could see what was going on in the fashion world. And, now we have influencers. So it's accessible to everybody. So I think those kinds of things are really important for everybody to see, including parents.
Including teachers too.
Yes.
Because most of my experience is in early childhood, and I always am trying to think, okay, well, where are these kids that I'm working with, where, listeners, where are your kids going to be going after they move out of early intervention and preschool? And being able to watch just an adult just like live their life and vlog and do all the things that anybody else does and talk about how their visual impairment impacts it, or maybe it doesn't, and there's misconceptions and things like that. So yes, exactly. Yay, social media.
And I'm excited, later in the season we are going to have some interviews with some visually impaired adults that are professionals. They are mothers, they are wives.
Awesome.
They are involved in their community. And so I'm really excited myself to hear those of the interviews that I didn't do and to share the ones that I was a part of, because I think it makes such a big difference. Even though my daughter is visually impaired and I work at VIPS, she came first. I didn't know about visual impairment before her. VIPS came after her. So I didn't adopt her because I knew about visual impairment. It was something learned. And I think what they bring is a good good idea, and I'm excited for everyone to hear them.
Nice. Yeah, I am too. I'm excited too. So, okay, so it's time to wrap up here. Time flies when we're having fun. What do you think, ladies? Do we recommend this book?
Yes.
And why?
I recommend it just for anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what experiences you have. I just think it's good to learn about people different from us and what you can do to relate to them and just learn about other people.
Yeah, I think this is a good book for people to read who, if you're feeling maybe like Rosemary did at the beginning, where you're curious or you're feeling fearful about what it would be like to be blind or what it would be like to interact with somebody who's blind. I think this is a really good read because it really can change your perspective, and I really like that about it.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I also think it gives you a little bit of insight on how other cultures around the world, so they're in Tibet and in India, and how those cultures see blind people, which is a little bit different than the way we do in this country. So not always a positive thing, but gives you some insight into what's going on in other countries and in the history of blindness. So yeah, I would recommend it too. So remember, everybody, we're going to sign off, but remember to go to the notes and get the resources that we give you there, and fill out the Qualtrics survey so that we get some input on what you think. If you read the book, we'd love to hear from you. So that would be the place for you to share that. So thanks, everybody.
And we will also link the book in the show notes as well, so that way you can go and read it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bye, everybody.
Before we go, let's talk about some of those sounds that you might have heard in today's episode. One of the sounds, which might have been an easier one to identify, was some birds singing in the background of Cathy's recording. And the other one was the sound of some workers arriving at Cathy's neighbor's house and unloading some equipment and getting started on some work. Thank you so much for listening to Feeling This Life. Please consider subscribing to Feeling This Life wherever you get your podcasts. And please take a minute or two to give us your feedback and your ideas for future episodes by completing our survey, which is linked in the show notes. There, you'll also find ways to get in contact with us, and you'll find resources related to today's episode. Please join us again next time for another episode of Feeling This Life.